I have more notes today, but I don't even know what to say. Since doing the first video I did a couple days ago, I've started to just kind of think more and more about how to process my thoughts and put them into a form to just throw out there into the world, and why I would even do this at this point right now, and then to not even question that, because what's the point anyway of it's kind of like a nihilism filtered into there. So let me just kind of like be more specific. I think, I consume a lot of this like left progressive, mostly white people news sphere, and especially during this quarantine, I just kind of go from the morning shows to the midday shows to the evening shows while I'm doing things like maybe working on some sort of like therapeutic artwork, like the things behind me, or just having really and very important conversations with people on the phone. That's been really helpful, I'm sure, for a lot of us to really reconnect with people, which is interesting, or connect with people on the phone, which is interesting because it's not something that I've really wanted to do for a very long time. And that idea of like, oh, so-and-so is calling me, or scheduling a time to talk to someone, or just picking up the phone and calling someone. And it's so interesting because in childhood, of course, that was something I looked forward to, talking to my grandparents or whomever, And I've kind of almost avoided the phone like the plague until now we have a plague. And I really enjoy those conversations. And I realize, and I know part of this is a question of time. And I know over the past decade, even though I've had, in some senses, more available time during the day than maybe prior to this past decade, a lot of it being due to the structure of my work, the roller coaster of it, where sometimes I'm employed and sometimes I'm not, and just how everything coming out of the 2008 crisis became much more free form in a sense for me in my life, which sure, there's benefits to having more time, but then also during that time, I've spent more of my time considering how to just survive. So a lot of it is like I don't even want to talk to people on the phone or connect with people, isolating more and more, because it's just like I'm thinking about so much of just what is survival. And so to talk to other people is to like give of my energy when I'm just wanting to figure out where the hell my next job's coming from, because so much of my work over the past decade has been very precarious, very much contract based, which is, a planned part of coming out of the 2008 crisis. And so now here we are in this crisis, right? We none of us know. I mean, the writing is on the wall based on the legislation that's already been passed through the federal level, and then the failures of the state level response to this across the country. Those of us who are really impacted by this stuff, like directly, and have been, and are very aware of the intricacies of the intentional failings of our government against working class people, we know that there's a $4 trillion slush fund, 500 billion leveraged to 4 trillion for mega corporations. In the last piece, the CARES Act, and then a few crumbs thrown at us within like the unemployment structure, temporary, assistance, which is still means tested, and all this other just stuff that is enough to make your head explode. So like a lot of my thoughts, even since yesterday, I've started to really think about, okay, so what do we do? What do we actually do? Because so much of what I see in the world here in New York City and online is this continued deference to power from the working class who don't see themselves as working class. So other hourly workers, people in different creative industries who are basically doing art and creating stuff to appease, the managerial and capitalist classes. and they don't see themselves as as a working class person. And thinking of all these pundits in the political sphere on the left, I guess you could call it, online, one of the things that the chatter is all about now, which it kind of was a little before, but really, of course, now without a Bernie Sanders campaign to kind of funnel its energy through, is like, well, how do we build power through a media, like a apparatus or what have you, and that goes to what I think I was saying yesterday, which is like when I would go and do door knocking for Bernie, I would look behind someone and they're watching MSNBC or CNN and thinking that is they're being fed the truth, and it's not. Like if you watch CNN and you watch MSNBC, they are lying to you repeatedly. They'll sprinkle in a few truths to throw you off, but their overall narrative is one of lies and corporate deference, and it's propaganda. Like that's what propaganda is. So, these online media personalities and organizations like the Young Turks and the Hill Rising and the Majority Report and Michael Brooks Show and all these different, Tim Black, so many different people, they're doing media analysis of like in the reactionary frame, which they've even started to talk about in the past few days. I actually, before I even heard them starting to talk about it, 2 or 3 days ago, I was watching the Young Turks, and Anna Kasparian was just, commenting on some stupid Trump thing or whatever that he did, something, and I finally hit the wall, and I was like, I can't, this is driving me nuts. I'm sick of hearing people of good moral character like her just complaining about this fucking monster. I can't anymore. So I started thinking from that day, I guess, till now, and then especially overnight, just like, well, then what do we do? What the hell do we do? Because we don't control CNN or MSNBC. And I started thinking about, as an activist, what have I done to create the narrative, right? As an activist, and it's, of course, you just go do action, right? So you create with a group of people or on your own some sort of political engagement. As a theatrical person, I'm a strong proponent of making sure that it is theatrically structured in a way that really will move people emotionally to action of their own, and will also grab attention, because that's what the media thrives off of. That's how its eyeballs turns into ad dollars. It's just pure capitalism. This is what, of course, Trump knows so well, because he's been a manipulator of media for decades, and we've heard the stories over and over and over of what he's done to gather and grasp media attention. And in our current environment, he's done it in the most masterful and maniacal of ways, of course, weaponizing hate, and that is like a great big attention getter. So I thought about that, and of course the failings of Bernie Sanders not wanting to attack Joe Biden and calling him his friend and all that bullshit, when Joe Biden is a rapist and a racist, and I will continue saying that because it is true. And like I've known all along, and now it's of course even more clear that you have to be bold in your messaging. You have to shock people awake, even if they're turned off by what you say. And I mean, in my own media sphere, I've lost over 1,000 friends on Facebook. Most of these people I don't even know personally. It's just people that through the activism over the years I've connected with, because I've been very direct and I've been very blunt in my commentary on things that they post, or in just the politics in general, or when I hear someone repeating a corporate talking point and I agitate that with a response, and they flip out. Because what I'm doing is I'm disrupting the status quo. And, I get it. People want to hold on to the world as they think it is constructed. And which is what is giving us Joe Biden as a Democratic nominee. People think a narrative, which they're not even really understanding that was his stuff that's been planted in their brain. Because no one wants to think that they've been manipulated. No one wants to think that that they are susceptible to propaganda. But we all are every day. What I'm doing right now is propaganda, in a sense, right? It is me just trying to sway and persuade maybe the 5 or 10 people who might watch a portion of this video. But that's where I actually came to last night, which was to say, well, maybe that is part of the answer, especially while we're in quarantine. where it is difficult to get out there on the street and do street activism to capture the media narrative to then move hearts and minds, which then moves the agenda forward in the direction you want it to go in, which leads to legislation, which leads to more people having more basic human dignity, which is what I'm all about. And so I'm like, well, I mean, I'm sitting here all day. At least I could do something that maybe a couple people might watch, right? And we don't have a full-on like powerhouse progressive apparatus or even really connected. Like, it's getting connected. I think this is what's coming out of what's happening right now is you're seeing these different entities, some of which I've named earlier, starting to talk and do crossover interviews with each other's shows and doing different new projects together. Anna Kasparian and Michael Brooks are doing a project together which starts this weekend. You have Matt Taibbi of the Useful Idiots who's starting his own offshoot thing. So there's like these things happening, and then there's just people like me who are just sitting here and just talking into a camera and putting it on YouTube, and maybe I'll put it on a Twitch account, and maybe I don't know. And maybe, so that is what we can do right now, right? For sure, more of us can be doing this kind of stuff where we're just sharing. How many people will actually do that is a big question. And that only reaches so far. So that is definitely like coming back full circle to, where I started this video, which is to say that there is somewhat of a sense of hopelessness that I feel. The thing that I've said for years from experience, which is the thing now I'm at the point of being like, well, I don't, it's like the only thing I know, is that to actually impact systems in this country, it's actually not that hard for certain things on the individual level. If it fits within a certain predetermined narrative for the power, the elite. So possibly part of what needs to happen always, and now, like, is we need to make the elite say the things that we already believe, and so then we can push them. We need to make them believe the things we believe. That's really what it is. And how do you do that? And believe doesn't necessarily mean that they actually really believe it, but it becomes a situation where if they don't move forward on a certain thing, it will directly impact them. And that's where the activism, of course, comes in. So, like, for instance, when we were fighting here in New York City, specifically in New York State, for marriage equality back in 2010, that was already a predetermined narrative within the Democratic Party. So we were fighting against, there were Democrats who obviously didn't want that to happen, and there's enough people who did, where our actions that we took did make the impact that was needed to get marriage equality in the state, which of course, it added to the whole national narrative, which then paved the way for the Supreme Court case, blah, blah, blah. Of course, that's not really the end goal. The end goal is like everyone having all the basic benefits of being a human. Marriage, the idea of like financial stability, that's a broader fight. That was the part of it that, like, I was in the marriage fight always looking for like a bigger picture. And then when I went on after the marriage fight and I did some protesting, like outside Senator Gillibrand's office, here are one of our senators here in New York, for like a full equality bill, which was like a bigger thing, I was ignored. Ignored by all the same media in the LGBT sphere, ignored by a lot of the activists I had worked with that were only really, I learned, interested in marriage and nothing bigger, and I'm like, what is that about? And I was going outside of the power structure, which is what the Bernie Sanders campaign is doing, what have you. And so that leaves me to like, where are we right now, which is, I think the only way, and this is what's sad about us humans, it's gonna take, I think, enough like white collar people to lose their jobs in this crisis that we're in, which isn't because of the virus, by the way. The crisis that we're in, the financial crisis we're in, is a long time coming. So don't call this like the corona depression or whatever. Like this is capitalism. This is what it does. There's always something that triggers how weak it is to cause it to collapse. If it wasn't going to be this, it was coming some other way. So, I mean, it feels like that there has to be a critical mass in order for like bigger shifts to happen, where all of a sudden the people in power are saying the things that we poor people have been saying all along, but it's because it's coming from, like the next tier down from them. I don't wish that for anyone, but I've also been like barely employed for a decade where I'm like, if you're not allied with me as like a manager type person or whatever, like I don't really care anymore. I don't care about your loss in this. You know what I mean? Like you're not going to care about me. That brings me to my final thing I want to say for today, which is another thing that's coming out of this political moment is talking about how do we unite working class people, because we have been intentionally separated into different camps. Republican working class people are different than Democratic working class people ideologically in certain ways. But we are all still hurting and working class. And in order to create the news and create the narrative, we need to find ways to work together with other working class people who are affiliated with a different political party, a brand, because these are only just really brands, because as I've said, you got the Republican apparatus that is aligned with power structure that is aligned with certain industries like oil and what have you. And then you have the Democratic establishment, which is aligned primarily with things like media, natural gas. I mean, they're actually both at this point being taken over by all of it. So it is one true oligarchy that's really formed. And so us working class people are just like, well, wait a minute, none of this is working for me. But depending on where we're situated in the world, we may react to it differently. If we've always never had anything, and the Republican Party is saying, well, I'm just not going to change anything. It's like, well, at least you're not going to take anything away or put more paperwork on my table for me to sign to tell you how poor I am. And on the Democratic side, it's like it's like a bunch of us just waiting for some crumbs, and we'll take those crumbs, and we'll just take a little, even if like you're going to continue to make us go mentally insane by doing all the means testing and all of this stuff that's happening and has been happening forever. So you got like different approaches to it. Of course, urban and rural poverty and working class life looks different. And yes, of course there's different isms involved in all of this. You have racism coming from both sides. You have classism coming from both sides. So we have to move through some of that stuff in a way, and I'm equally as guilty as anyone, to say, all right, well, where do we go? How do we bring a true working class voice together and a list of demands from us? And again, we're seeing this right now happening within the protests that are happening in fast food establishments and at Amazon and what have you. So that is absolutely a current focal point. I'm going to pause the video here because I have a few more things I want to say, but I think it's running out. Oh no, I have 1 minute. I can finish this in a minute. Okay. But where else? Maybe that's my big question I'm leaving with today for myself, for you. I would love to hear anyone who's watched this video to this point. I want to hear other people's voices. Like, I want to know what other people are thinking. So if you want to comment below, and where else can we find intersections as working class people to start organizing more effectively together across like this quote unquote red-blue divide? That's where I'll leave the video today. So if you've watched this far, thanks for listening, and who knows, maybe I'll keep doing this. I don't know.